call the meeting to order here at just about 5:31. Can we get a roll call?
Commissioner Roberts.
Here.
Commissioner Husnick.
Here.
Commissioner Lorge.
Here.
Commissioner Erickson.
Here.
And President Bain.
Everyone would stand for the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so we'll do approval of the agenda. My understanding that Rick Roy from Washington County wasn't feeling well, so he's not going to be able to attend this evening. So that would be a change that I would note. With that said, do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda and subtract item number 7.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Next item is approve the minutes from the October 10th meeting. Do I have a motion?
What about the September 12th meeting?
Oh, yeah, I said that, sorry, September 12th, first September 12th meeting. A motion?
I make a motion to approve the regular meeting minutes from the September 12th meeting.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I abstain. I was not here.
Okay. All right, then, sorry, I skipped that. So 6, the minutes from the October 10th meeting. Do I have a motion?
I move we approve.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Abstain. I wasn't here for that meeting.
Okay. All right, and then as we mentioned, 7, Rick wasn't able to attend. Number 8, City of Forest Lake Commercial Improvement Incentive Program. Dan's going to lead us through that.
Members of the EDA, before you tonight is the final draft of the Commercial Improvement Incentive Program, which used to be known as the Downtown Incentive Program. Before I kind of go into this, I do want to take a brief moment to thank everybody on the EDA for the great work and input on this policy development. This does represent a significant step forward for the EDA in terms of developing solid financial policy for how we administer programs here. If you recall, we kind of started with a very limited policy here, and now we have a solid policy that does incorporate feedback not only from the EDA but also from the business community. So it's more reflective of what the actual business owners or those doing the work were looking for in an incentive program. A couple of the highlights on this program, as we mentioned before, this program does expand the eligibility area, so it now encompasses nearly all the commercial business districts within the city of Forest Lake. One substantial change from the last time we talked about this was when it was presented back at the last workshop, this was presented as a grant. After sending it to legal, we had to change the terminology to a forgivable loan. So it's no longer a grant program, it's a forgivable loan program. The reason why that was done was we wanted to ensure that the EDA has a legal authority to issue the funds. So there's no question on it. It's in statute that the EDA does have the ability to enter into a forgivable loan program. So we wanted to make sure that we were in compliance with had the proper legal authority to do this program. From an application standpoint or an end user standpoint, they're not going to see any change in how this program has been administered. They'll still receive the payments once they complete the work. They're not actually having to, do a loan program that gets approved. It'll be from their end user, it'll be very similar to how it has been existing in the past. The forgivable loan program, like I mentioned, it's making sure that we're in alignment with the authority of the EDA. So how this will work is the applicant will fill out the application for the program. Staff will review it to make sure the work gets completed. Then they'll fill out a loan agreement, which will come before the EDA for approval. There is a copy of that loan agreement that's enclosed in the packet. Once that loan agreement is approved, as a part of that, there's a section in the loan agreement that states the loan is forgiven once the work is completed. So since we're going to authorize these after the work is completed, the loan will get issued, and then immediately since the work has been completed, staff will verify that. There'll be a loan forgiveness letter that's in the packet as well. So in essence, the loan gets forgiven or gets issued and then gets forgiven in the same moment, and then we give those funds over to the applicant. So it's a little bit of a circular process in terms of how we do this, but it's just more on the paperwork side, so the applicants aren't going to have to worry about loan payments or underwriting or anything like that. It's just a terminology difference in how we're going to classify the program. I do have a copy of that loan forgiveness letter in there as well. That's gonna be included in we'll put that in the file, so there'll be no question in 5 years down the road to make sure that there's no payments due. So we'll have these very much closed off, so there's not gonna be any questions, in the future as if a loan had been, forgiven. A couple of other changes to the program. I did confirm that the EDA has final approval for this policy and for all the funds that the program expends. The original one that was brought forward back at the workshop had this going to council for their sign off on it, but I was able to confirm that since this is an EDA program, EDA policy approval tonight puts it into place, and all the funds that we spend don't need to go to council. They can be approved here at the EDA level. Also, I removed the language that was stating that if a property had been previously awarded a grant or a funding, they were ineligible for another funding source. Basically now, if you apply for one in, say, 22, get approved, and then you do another eligible project in 25, you can still apply for that grant program in 25 as well, as long as there's funds available at that point. And then added language in there just clarifying that rear of building improvements qualify if that building has a back publicly accessible rear access. I wanted to make sure that there's no confusion like the properties that are along 61 on the Lakeside Memorial Park side, which have accesses on both sides. If they do a rear facing improvement, those would still qualify as well. And then finally, the graduated scale for loans, which allow us to have smaller projects be considered, is added in here as well. At this point, staff is recommending approval of the Commercial Improvement Incentive Program policy. And at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions the EDA has on this policy or program.
All right, anyone have any questions on this change?
Just a couple of things. Number one, thanks for your work on it. I know there was major changes, and so thank you for incorporating all the feedback that we gave. In the original packet, there was just a couple of language things that were in there that I don't know if they've been modified. I'm not finding them in here. But at one place, it was still referred to as a grant versus a loan. It was under bullet V, item A. And there was also, I think, under bullet V, item D, it referred it going back to council for consideration. So I don't know if that's still the case or not. Just thought we should make sure that's tightened up.
I will make sure in the finals that we'll get those corrections in. I'm not seeing them in.
Yeah, it was in the original packet, but it was like page 6 of the original packet that was sent out.
Yeah, I'm on a different version. So.
Yeah, imagine.
Oh, under the application. Yeah, we'll know those changes and get those made in the final once we get this approved. So.
The other thing that I thought was conflicting in the loan agreement was that, under the recitals, it's a no-interest loan. And then later in the agreement, it says that if the work's not completed, the loan will be due with interest. It just feels so confusing. And I just wondered, even broader, is the loan the best language that we have to use? Because if I go get a loan for a project, I expect to get the money and then I'm going to go do the project, right?
Right.
Where this is the opposite.
And this is one where I went back and forth with legal on this one because I was trying to, originally this was originally classified as an abatement. And then grant was sort of the intermediary because an abatement kind of connotated tax abatement. And in terms of making sure that we're in authority what the EDA can do from a funding perspective, the forgivable loan part was sort of where we ended up landing. And I fully agree that it was one of those things where I was trying to make this as simple as possible from a loan agreement standpoint, where they're not having to go through underwriting, they're not having to do the work prior to. So the way I explained this to legal was that basically these loans aren't issued until the work has been completed, same as we're before now, where we're not prepaying for somebody's exterior improvements. They complete the work. That's been communicated to the applicant from day one, saying you're eligible once the improvement has been made, and we can drive by to verify that that has been made. Mm-hmm. So in essence, the forgivable loan agreement is sort of in a roundabout way, it's the one way we could do to expend the funds without having anybody challenge, is the EDA authorized to do this with public dollars?
Yeah. Well, I get reading that it's still the heart of what we're trying to accomplish. It just feels, more convoluted than it needs to be.
fully agree with that. It was one of those things too where I was like, even on the circular standpoint of like, we issue the loan and we forgive it in the same motion, you know, because I wanted to make sure that we're not having to go through the underwriting, have any comfort, you know, with that letter that's in there, then the applicant gets, they both get the signed agreement and the forgiveness letter right there that goes in their file. So they have proof that we're not requiring a payment down the road.
Yeah, and being intimately involved in the conversations, I totally get that. And that's where I think those conflicting, you know, it's interest-free, but then with interest just adds to the confusion. So maybe we can tighten that up so that it's clearly not gonna be, you know, a situation where I'm gonna have to pay this back.
Yeah, we can review that. That's not a problem. We'll take a look and see if there's something else we can do there, but
And to that point, too, the agreements won't come back. The final agreements will have for approvals. This is just an example agreement because the final approvals, when the agreements will get approved when they come back for, on each applicant basis. This is just a general what they will look like.
Okay, thank you.
And we're not talking about a huge amount of money either, you know, so. And I know that when we do projects for the city of Forest Lake, it's always a reimbursement thing as far as the government is concerned, so it seemed to make sense to me, at least. But I like the changes in the language and this, for me, it cleared up a lot of things. Made it a lot more doable, I think.
So I would just piggyback on just a couple concerns of Lace there. It just, so with this being a loan and you have a guarantee, not knowing what the previous contract looked like, is that some way it could affect credit if someone's personally guaranteeing this, or any concerns there that someone might be hesitant to engaging in something like this?
I don't believe that. I mean, we're not doing a credit check on them. I mean, this is in essence, they're applying it, like I said, after the fact. We're not going through full underwriting. That was one thing I made very clear when I looked at this program with, when they said it was a forgivable loan program, I kind of was like, let's pause here, because I don't want to have to all of a sudden be doing underwriting for loan programs and have to go through that whole process just to give a $5,000 loan for somebody that's already done the work. This really is changing the vernacular from grant to forgivable loan, just again to make sure that we're in alignment with what the EDA is authorized to do from a statutory standpoint. If the EDA had been statutory allowed to do grant programs, I would have much rather called it a grant program. However, that language gets a little tougher to, if somebody were to challenge, can the EDA do this work based on statutory authorizations? If it's grant, there's gray area. With a forgivable loan, it's well documented that EDAs can do forgivable loans.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments?
Yeah,
or-
I think the whole thing was originally kind of set up to help pay for the taxes, help with the taxes that first year. I mean, that was part of the language earlier, and I think that's all it's for, is to kind of lighten that load a little bit, especially that first year.
So with that said, and some of those changes, are we looking for an approval tonight, or we want to wait till those changes are actually in place, or how? do
We can do a policy change with the, we'll go through and change to verify with Commissioner Erickson mentioned on the council and the grant, when we clean that language up in the final version, so we can do a approval pending those changes. On the loan agreement side, we will reach out with legal to confirm on the interest, no interest side, and bring that back as you bring an application forward. So the agreement is still something that's not finalized until we actually have a loan or an applicant that comes in. We'll bring the actual final loan agreement and forgiveness letter on a project by project basis. So we still have some time to make those small changes to that language at there. But I will make sure that the base document that we use when we send these agreements out contains that correction.
Okay, so you're looking for an approval or a decision tonight? then?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so we get that approved tonight, because ideally, I'd like to really kind of get the marketing materials done between now and the end of the year and really get this ready to go and launch the beginning of '23. Obviously, if somebody applies for it now, they would come in under this new updated policy. I just realistically hitting into the holiday season, a lot of this stuff sort of gets backburnered, and I don't want to have marketing on this type of program sort of hit that void of the holiday season. I'd rather come out in the beginning of the year and really hit the ground running with '23 in terms of marketing this program for the business community.
Well, I, for one, I think it's great. It's good to keep it not limited just to downtown, because there's other properties outside that district that could use, some help with improving. And so I think it's great, and thank you for that work. Does it want a motion on?
Oh, I've got a
Oh,
comment.
sorry.
According to the scale, if you have one more dollar spent at 10,000, you get $1,000 more. Why can't this just be a straight, like a 10%?
I mean, that was a percentage of what was totally spent.
Mhm.
That was the scale that we talked about in the past, as sort of a way to break it down. I mean, that was discussed in previous workshops in terms of just the graduated scale. And I think, again, you're trying to incentivize larger projects. I mean, I think that was also sort of the intent of, I would assume that if you're at a project that's $9,995, you're gonna find something that's eligible to kick it over to 10,001 to get that larger amount. But that was sort of the scale that we had discussed in previous workshops. Moving forward on this, I want the EDA to know that this is also something that, once it's approved tonight, I don't want to leave the policy on the shelf for another 10 years. I think we try to revisit this every 24 months to say, hey, is this scale still applicable? Because at this point, even though the business community has said we want a graduated scale, we'll kind of see where these next round of applications come in, and we can always make some adjustments as we move forward on, reviewing these policies moving forward. Because I just don't want these to be something where, like our last business incentive program, where it gets approved in 2010 or 11 and just sits on the shelf for over a decade without having anybody review it. I want these to be more living documents that go through sort of a regular review process.
So, Jenny, I mean, do we want to explore more on the percentage thing, or is everyone fine with how it's set up at this
I don't
point?
remember that, or I wasn't at that workshop where that was determined. I'm just going by, I'm on another grant committee, and we do a percentage. And I'm just looking at, say, somebody spends, up to $20,000, they get $1,500. If they spend $20,001, they get $2,500. So anybody looking at this would go for the dollar more, so I just don't see the logic, but if you workshopped it and agreed, let's try it out.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember us having that conversation in workshop. Jenny makes a valid point about a straight percentage. It would certainly incentivize just getting over those benchmarks. You're a little less than 10%, between 15,000 and 20,000. Because I don't have a strong issue, against considering that modification. How much back work is that for city staff to?
I mean, it'd be easy to switch the scale. We just need to go back and try to, readjust that.
Yeah, I think one of the issues is the cap. I mean, how far do you want to go with that? I mean, right now it goes 40,000 plus is a straight 5,000, but what if it's a $200,000 a rehab on a front of a building? So do you want to go to $20,000 if it's 10%? So,
No, you've got a cap on it.
but there's not a cap on it. You have to cap it, but that's question is what's the cap going to be? You have to go by percentage,
I'd still do 5,000.
or $40,000, or $50,000 if it's 10%.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, do it straight 10% reimbursement up to a $5,000 total. I guess it kind of takes playing games out of it a little bit.
I mean, we could do it easy. I mean, if that's what the EDA wants to do, that's an easy policy adjustment to make on both this and the application. Just say up to 10% up to 50 grand, then it's,
That's it. Yeah.
verification on, receipts that get submitted. So you're right. I mean, it does eliminate a little bit of the gamesmanship in terms of there, but again, part of what this was intended to do, as we discussed previously, was to sort of still try to get those businesses to do the bigger projects to sort of incentivize the larger projects. But if we want to go to a 10%, that's an easy award scale to do.
Well, that's where I'm a little conflicted myself, because I would rather see them do something if it's a percentage, and if you're only spending a couple bucks, I'd almost rather see them play the game to get what they, to help incentivize that. But if the majority would like to change it to a percentage, I'm fine
Well,
with
you
it.
could also put a minimum on there where, any work done less than 5,000, there's
Right,
no.
yeah, this doesn't qualify. That's the only thing you could do there, I think.
Mhm.
But I agree that the percentage thing might be a little more equitable, a little more even-handed, and
Doing
I'd
the-
support it.
Doing the percentage?
Sure.
change? Okay.
It's a good idea.
So then with that additional change, you still looking for a motion?
Yeah, I can
based-
make that,
based on those
yeah, it's
changes?
memorialized. I'll just do a 10% from 5,000, which would be the minimum of 500, up to 50,000, which would be the $5,000 cap. So then we're also, then at that point, we're just increasing that top level by $10,000, which I think most of the approvals I've seen so far have not had a problem hitting that $50,000 cap.
Okay, great. Someone want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'd make a motion that we adopt the forgivable loan agreement with the two changes that we made here tonight. The one that Mr. Erickson wanted, and then going to the 10%, or the percentage rather than the scale.
Okay, I have a second.
I'll second it.
Can we get a roll call, Karen?
Commissioner Erickson,
Aye.
Commissioner Large,
Aye.
Commissioner Husnick,
Yeah, aye.
and Vice Chair Roberts.
Aye. All right, it's great. All right, so number 9, Headwaters 123, concept ghost plating and grant application for Washington County. Dan, go ahead.
Members of the EDA, a little bit of background on this in terms of the work that we've done on the Headwaters parcel to date. So far, we've completed a Phase 1 environmental and a wetland delineation on the parcels. And as we looked forward in terms of what sort of are the next steps for the Headwaters parcels, like what's another, possible arrow we could put in the quiver to market this project. Did have conversations with Dan Peterson in terms of, from his perspective as the broker for the site, what's the site missing, what are we needing? And one of the things that he had talked about was the possibility of getting some ghost plating or concept plating done. Want to just let the EDA know that these studies, that when we do these studies, there is a lot of value from a staff perspective, and we've used them, or I've used them to respond to a number of RFIs for the parcel. When we first started marketing the Headwaters parcel, before we had these studies done, when an RFI would come in for the site, it was basically a all hands on deck sort of panic at the staff level, just trying to collect all the information that was needed for these RFIs. Now having them in place, if an RFI comes through on, say, a Tuesday afternoon, it's a couple hours of just making sure that all the spreadsheets are filled out, making a couple of contacts, and we're able to submit them back. Had a couple of conversations with DEED, who usually sends these out, and I was telling the representative from DEED, I said, these RFIs, we're in a position now, based on the work that we've done, the studies that we've done, where we can respond quickly and get the information out. And a lot of that is based on these studies. So when we bring these studies, to the EDA for consideration, just know that we are using them, more frequently than is probably communicated back to the EDA. So that being said, one of the things that we had talked about with the broker was discussion of possible concept plating or ghost plating on the site. We're still competing very well for large parcels. So for RFIs that come in for the 100+ acre sites, we're still competing well for those. However, we're a little bit less competitive if somebody's looking for, say, a 20 or a 30 acre site. Not that we're not willing to subdivide the parcel. We've expressed that to the broker and the potential clients. But the issue becomes is that if a site selector is looking at the site, they're not seeing how the site can break down. They may not be familiar with what are the challenges on the ground of that particular site in terms of subdivisions. So in conversations with Dan Peterson, he said, doing a ghost plating or concept plating can help change that. It can create the visuals that those site selectors look at and say, okay, based on the actual site itself and the parameters that are there, here's how a 30 acre site or land can build out for a data center. What's before you tonight is a proposal that'll provide us with 2 possible ghost plats for the site. These ghost plats will be based in reality, so they're not just lines on a map. There's going to be some basis on there based on where the Met Council interceptor line is. We'll have that referenced on there. We'll also have where the wetlands are on there. So there will be a basis in reality for this concept in ghost plating. Also have talked to Bruce about making sure that he's in communication with the broker in terms of how he develops these concept plats, wanting to make sure that the sites, the acreages that are selected are reflective of what the market's currently wanting. So we're not just, again, picking 25 acres because it's a nice number, that there's actual market basis for that 25 acres to be there. One thing with this application, this application or this proposal is also eligible for a CDA pre-development grant. At this point, the funding would be 80-20, so 80% would come from Washington County, so 20% come from the EDA budget for the city of Forest Lake. I do have enclosed a grant application and an authorizing resolution for the EDA for consideration tonight. And with that funding of 80-20, the breakdown is Washington County would pay $8,880 for the study, and the city of Forest Lake pays $1,500 for the proposed study. Looks like Bruce has this anticipated to be completed in December of this year, so relatively quick turnaround time on this. If you look at the concept or the proposal that Bruce enclosed, he also had an amendment or another option to do some, basically some 3D modeling on the site. At this point, I'm not recommending that we do the 3D modeling. I have not seen conditions where the market really would want that additional modeling work done at this point. I think it's more on the ghost platting is where the benefit's gonna be. So staff is recommending approval of the Washington County CDA pre-development grant application, as well as approval of resolution 11-1422-01. And then finally, approval of the Talali ghost plat alternative, and have that approval be contingent on authorization or award of the Washington County grant. So we want to make sure that we have those grant funds in hands before we authorize the proposal from Talali. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the EDA has on either the ghost platting or the Washington County grant application.
Questions?
Our broker, I mean, he's given us this idea that this would be a helpful tool as you put arrow in our quiver. What are some of the other ones? I mean, is there more that we'll be looking at going forward, or is it kind of like just do another one to see if kind of get us over the hump to get that interest, or how does that play out?
So that's a great question. That's actually one of the questions I led out with Dan when I started looking at, where's the best return on investment for the EDA to put investments in study? Because you don't all of a sudden want to just study this thing to death and not have the market respond to it. And where this really started was with, the Excipio study as one of those options. It said, hey, if we bring the Excipio study back, do you see a lot of market demand or a lot of market responding back to this, these Excipio studies? And he said, if he was making the investment, he'd put it into the concept planning, because he said where this comes into play is when you have those calls that come out, somebody say looking for a 30-acre site, you give them a site that's like the Headwaters, Headwaters, the 123 acres, they may not know how that's gonna break down. They're gonna go back to those sites that are already sort of pre-set up for a 30-acre. But Dan said at this point, this sort of rounds out his marketing materials that he would have for the site. And, obviously an Excipio study is not gonna hurt, but he said if he had to sequence stuff out, he would just say, get the concept plotting done first, see what the market response is. Because one of his points on, say, the Excipio study was some of these selectors or some of the CFOs from the companies that are coming to land in are gonna do some of that work themselves anyway. And we already have one, I think it was Centerville, that has an Excipio study that it's not specific to our site, but it's sort of regionalized and kind of shows some of those costs that are there. But this is the type of study that Dan said, I would definitely start here on this one, and then, see where how the market responds to it. But this was his recommendation based on what he's seeing out there in the marketplace.
Questions? So are we, with doing this, there was a period of time where you mentioned that we are open to other projects or developments, not just a data center. So, and there was a developer at one point that was looking to do something about closer to the golf course, and I didn't understand he was a challenge to staff and that. But with this, are we more open than we were 2 years ago to something, and why maybe this is the route we're going at this point?
I think at this point, I mean, in talking with Dan, we've always have been open to what the market's going to put in there. I mean, obviously, we've got this position with a data center broker. He's a technology-based broker. However, his team at CBRE they share listings. They have conversations with listings. So if an industrial comes through or a warehousing project comes through, we're in consideration for those as well. This breakdown here, I think, makes us more competitive in the data center technology sphere, because you're starting to see, in my last conversation with Dan, he said you're starting to see some requests coming in for those 20, 30 acre size sites. and having us sort of show how this site can pre-break down, can sort of tee us up for those users who are looking for smaller sites, or somebody looking for, say, you know, an office complex. You know, that's something that could potentially see here, because they may not need the full 123. I guess it allows us to kind of compete in both marketplaces a little bit better. The full user that's looking for the full 123, or somebody looking for a smaller size, whether that be technology, a high-tech manufacturing company. You're starting to see some of those come through on various sizes for, land asks in there anywhere between 20 and 80 acres come in. And by seeing sort of this pre-broken down, when those RFIs come in, they'll see those visuals, and then they'll kind of see that you've started doing some of those work. Where if they get through and they say, yes, we like Forest Lake site, we need 80 acres, they know that we've already looked at the site and says, here's how we can deliver 80 acres for them as a result of this ghost platting. So we've always sort of marketed this site in terms of a job creation center. We've never just limited to technology. We have kept it open to all users that would potentially come forward, and have entertained sort of, you know, kind of a potpourri of different projects and, you know, RFIs that have come in. They have not been in the technology sphere.
Jen?
Chris, question for you. How many acres would the data center require that we've talked about in the past?
Mr. Chair, members, it's all over the board, to be honest with you. It could be as small as 5 acres, and there are sites, for example, over in Becker right now where Google is looking at probably 100 acres. So right now, I was at a conference on Wednesday or Thursday last week, and we heard at that conference, it was at the Minnesota Real Estate and Industrial Development Conference, that there are 4 hyperscale data centers looking at the Minnesota market right now. We don't know who they are or where they'll go, but hyperscale are the large ones. Those are probably the ones that are going to take between 30 to 50 acres maybe, or maybe even up to 100, depending upon the size of it. And I think to Dan's point earlier, it's really good to have this type of marketing information so that it's not just a picture of our cornfield. We actually have some concepts and some roads and some buildings, you know, plotted out there just to show a developer that is looking at the area or might be considering the area that it's not just any town USA. We've actually thought this through a little bit further, and I want to thank Dan. We had the opportunity to go to the MinCar Expo about a month ago down in Minneapolis, and there were 825 site selectors, builders, brokers, and developers at this conference, and Dan was with us at the display booth. It would have been really nice to have something like this to hand to folks to say, hey, we've thought this through a little bit. This 100-acre parcel could be subdivided, and here's an example of what that might look like. And then I want to mention on December 7th, we are speaking at the Minnesota Real Estate Conference. The Suburban Market Summit will be in Golden Valley, and I don't know how soon this could be done, Dan, but it would be really nice to have some concepts to take with us to speak at that booth where Dan, myself, and Bruce Saylor from Connexus will be talking about the 123 acres. So, but a short answer to your question, it could be as small as 5 acres, or it could be as large as 100, depending upon the size of the data center. The one I worked on in Duluth was about 20 acres.
So if we had somebody interested in buying 10, 20 acres, is there any spot there that's like earmarked for a data center that's ideally located near water lines or power or anything else? Is there a spot in this 123 acres that's the best for a data center that should be kind of set aside momentarily?
I think to that point, there obviously is going to be in a ideal location in that parcel for a data center. At this point, I don't know where it is. I mean, you can make assumptions, but I'm also not a site selector. I don't know what all the qualifications they need for a 10-acre site are going to be. I think by ghost platting it, you're going to start to see how that shakes out and how that breaks down. Where what I'm gathering when I talk to the site selectors or talk to the broker is that if you give a selector 123 acres without any sort of parameters based on that, they get a little bit frozen in the fact that it's like, well, I don't need that much land. I only need 40 acres. If you show them a breakdown saying, here's a possible way you could take this 123 acres and break it down into 3 40-acre parcels, now they're starting to get their head around that because it's more in alignment with what they're looking at. You know, because you see like some RFIs will come in and they'll say, we need 80 acres with the expansion up to 100. Well, you send them 123 acres, and at first they're sort of like, that's too much land, we don't want to make that investment, but you start to get them in that spot, you show them the pictures of how this can break down, you get some traction with them, then they go back to their client and say, here's a city that's actually done some investigative work where they're not having to come in, invest their time and their, some capital to do this work themselves. As we all know in development, time is money, and if we can clear whatever hurdle we can clear now without a project on the table, makes it so much easier on the back end when they're looking at, hey, we have a project, we have 6 months to get this thing through, can you guys do it? If we have this type of work there, that just helps us. It's a feather in our cap, and it does help keep those selectors engaged with the city much longer than they would if we don't have this type of information.
And to follow up, when that particular parcel was developed with Headwaters, the utilities are there, the electric's there, the sewer's there, the water's there, so it doesn't really matter where in that 123 acres it takes. Everything's right there, or a very small jump to whatever they need, so it's all prepared, ready to go, basically.
Oh, the reason I asked was I thought if a data center went in, we really had to upgrade for water for them? Is that no longer?
No, they don't use a lot of water.
They've changed a lot of their cooling tactics in terms of how they're using it. It's been a couple of years since I attended a data conference, but they used to be heavy water users because they were just basically taking water and dumping it in. With sort of them becoming more, a lot of these companies are very environmentally conscious. They really have changed some of the dynamics of how they do cooling some of our closed loop systems that don't dump as much. I mean, they can still be, some of them can still be higher water users, but a lot of that technology has changed and their cooling is now much better. And in Minnesota even, they're excited to come here because of the fact that even though we don't like the snow and the cold, it's free cooling for them. So they do get some benefit to us being cold 9 months out of the year.
Thank you.
Patrick, refresh my memory now, that interceptor line kind of goes right across the middle of that thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's the nice thing about this ghost plating, that interceptor, which is, I believe, a 36-inch interceptor, by ghost plating, we may not have to, in the future, if we can break, if we have to break these parcels up, or we have somebody who wants 20 or 30 acres, not have to move that. I mean, if it's a data center and wants all 123 acres, then we'll have to discuss moving that and who's gonna pay for it and how it's gonna happen and what the timing is. But if we're successful and 50 acres here, 20 acres here, we can hopefully, and Bruce probably will do this, ghost plat it so there's a street that follows that interceptor. So in the future, if they need to fix it or replace it, they'll just dig it up a street, not laying a building on top of it, which is definitely something we don't want.
That's why this concept really makes sense to me.
It absolutely.
It really does, because you don't have a full plot there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's potentially dividable already.
Yeah, and if we've already talked to the Met Council about moving that if we have to, and the $2 million it'll cost us to move, and probably going up every day or every year that goes by. So the ghost platting, if we're going to break these parcels up, is important to try to break it up so we don't have to have that moved.
And to that point on the Met Council line too, had the Met Council not been agreeable to us moving it, I think we would then at that point kind of realize it's 2 60-acre parcels or however that breaks down. But the fact that they are agreeable to moving it, we can now let developers know with confidence that if you need a full 123 acres, you need corner to corner for your development, we are able to get that line moved. There's a cost associated with it, but it's an option, so we can still sell it as a full 123. Or if they don't need that full amount and they want to break it down, and want to show how we can break it down based on the Met Council line, we will have those based on this ghost platting as well.
Ryan, Bolton and Mig did some work on that. Did we determine how much of that land is dry or buildable out of the 123? Was that part of that?
I don't remember offhand what the percentage was, but Dan has the wetland delineation, so just visually we could look at that and you could see what that area is. But
Yeah, that's for a bigger conversation, different conversation.
maybe we should just
curious.
share again some of that information that we've done over the past, and they just have it at their fingertips.
And then the other question, so that gentleman, is it Scipio or whatever, he presented, he made the comment about having 2 sources of power in there, and that we're lacking that as opposed to the site down in Centerville has that. What's the reality of getting 2 sources of power into that site?
So we do have conversations with both Connexus and Excel. So they both talked about if we got a user that came in that needed redundant power from multiple providers, that they would work together to supply that. So And part of what the Excipio study also was looking at was also from the fiber standpoint. They said all the fiber was trenched in on the 61 corridor. They may need a line to come in from the west side, the west side of the property, just so if there's a trench cut in 61, it's not taking out both the primary and the redundant. They may need a second location, but as far as I can tell, there's probably an ability to pull something over from Columbus, because I know Columbus does have some cable or fiber capacity that's just been built out recently. But from a redundant power standpoint, both Connexus and Excel have been in communications about being able to serve that site, because you can throw a rock from the Excel territory, hit Connexus, and vice versa. They're right next to each other at that parcel.
We had that issue even at the airport. There's a line there someplace.
And in fact, I think the line dividing it is actually at the airport. I
Yeah,
think it
yeah.
runs right through the airport property is where the dividing line is from the territories.
Hey, any other questions? I'm assuming you're looking for a direction on, or a vote or a.
Yeah,
approval
there's
on
a,
something?
in the packet, there's on the staff memo, there's a recommendation for the approval of the grant application. And then also, second would be the approval of the resolution that's enclosed, which is an authorizing resolution for the CDA grant application. And then finally would just be a approval of the enclosed Talali proposal, just pending, contingent on receiving the Washington County grant. So we want to make sure that we have those grant funds in hand before we authorize the study.
And how long a process is that, Chris, once we approve something, if we approve something?
Mr. Chair, it does not have to go to the CDA board. It's approved at the staff level, so myself and Melissa Taphorn, our executive director, can look at it by the end of this week.
Okay.
Thank you.
And just on to Bruce's timeline question about how long this will take, I believe Bruce has scoped out that this should be completed by December, so this is a pretty quick turnaround from him on his standpoint. So theoretically, if everything goes, there's no delays in it, we could possibly have something for that industrial conference or that next conference in early December.
All right, so do I have we'll go even with questions.
No, let's make a motion to approve the Washington County CDA pre-development grant application, as well as approval of resolution 1114-2201 and approval of the Talia Ghost Plat alternative pending award of the Washington County CDA grant.
Second.
And something like, do you want a roll call, or is it, would you prefer a roll call on something, or?
Doesn't matter.
Okay, well, go ahead, Karen, roll call, yes.
Commissioner Roberts,
Aye.
Commissioner Husnick,
Aye.
Commissioner Lorge,
Aye.
and Commissioner Erickson.
Aye.
All right, great. So number 10, downtown boat launch relocation and shoreline study proposal. Dan?
President, members of the EDA, as we discussed at the workshop, the last workshop, kind of the next steps in the downtown plan, and one of the things that I identified is the need to really get this boat launch question answered. You know, A, are we able to move it? And B, if so, where is that location gonna be? Because a lot of our other projects that we have in the downtown plan is sort of hinging on that, the possible location or relocation of the boat launch. We did have that scoping workshop. We looked at taking it just from beyond the boat launch and adding some additional scope of services to a possible study for the downtown. I did reach out to Bruce and asked him, you know, based on the conversations that we had at the last workshop, you know, I asked him to put together a proposal for not only the downtown boat launch, but also including the shoreline study as well. He did provide me with that updated proposal. The total study cost at this point is $18,345 for all of the work in the closed proposal. And we're looking at an anticipated completion date, if approved, of approximately February of '23. One of the key things to keep in mind is that if this is authorized, at the completion of this study, we'll have deliverables from the shoreline side that we can use to apply for grants. So right now, all the work that was been done at downtown planning has sort of been at that initial kind of high-level planning stage. This level gets us down into very project-specific level for shoreline enhancement, shoreline restoration work, as well as boat launch, possible boat launch relocations and concept diagrams for the parking. It gets us prepared, so if we go back to the DNR for a possible grant, we'll have those not only the study of the projects, but also updated budgets that we can then present to the DNR as part of grant applications. one way to think about this is that this is basically one step higher than the actual construction documents. So we're sort of bridging that gap between the high-level study and the actual construction documents. It's sort of in that sweet spot area there. As discussed, a couple of things that with this project, staff is going to be leading a couple of the conversation points with, as we work through this project. A couple of those points are the staff will be the lead with the DNR, so we're not going to have Bruce lead those conversations. Staff will lead those conversations with the DNR. Basically, we want to make sure that Forest Lake staff is at the table to really kind of re-engage the DNR and forge those relationships. So as we move forward in actual execution on these projects, those relationships with the city staff are there. The study itself will look at up to 2 shoreline improvement concepts that include shoreline structure, pedestrian overlook, transient dock, and canoe and kayak landings. We'll have a preliminary boat launch and parking study concept diagram for up to 5 opportunity sites that depict and quantify circulation, launch, and parking. Want to note in here that a couple of those opportunities may be for trailer parking without a launch, so separating out launch from parking, so we're not having those possibly combined. And then also Bruce will prepare a pro and con of each concept, and then as well the cost estimates. So again, we're going to get more specific on the cost estimates for what these projects entail. And the deliverables will be concepts for the launch, parking, and shoreline improvements, the pros and cons analysis, as well as cost estimates. Staff is recommending approval of the enclosed expanded boat launch relocation study with Talali. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have on the study or the process that Bruce is proposing.
So I'm just going to start on, can you introduce this, now this is the second proposal from this Torali, now that Bruce apparently is with them, just so maybe some background as to their expertise in that, because this is the first I've heard of them, and I knew he went to a different firm, but just maybe some background there. If you
Yeah, so Bruce left HKGI, went over with Talali, and basically it's a very similar firm. So this is just a startup firm that he went with. So they do urban planning, they do concept planning, they do ghost planning. It's very much, I would say, a very similar wheelhouse to what HKGI provided. It's just a different firm. Also confirmed with Bruce that, you know, this type of project is still the work that he's engaged on in his new firm. Sometimes when people leave firms, they may switch to a different specialty. He said this is very much in his wheelhouse where he's currently at, and since he did a lot of that pre-work or sort of like the downtown study work, he has all that background information, so he's not having to spend a lot of time getting spun up on those. He can start working on the actual plan study from day one. But Talali as a group is very similar in terms of the work that they do as HKGI. They're just a little bit smaller than what HKGI currently is.
Was he able to take the work that he had before with him to this new company?
I don't know the level of background files that he has, but I know that since he drafted it all, I'm assuming he probably still has some of those files. If not, we do have final copies of the plan, so we'd be able to provide him, you know, he was submitting the files that he was using to us for review, so I would assume that he still has either them, or if not, we can provide him with what we have.
Okay, just so we don't get rolled over again for work that's already been done.
Correct, and that was one of the reasons, you know, as we went through this sort of next level down, I mean, it didn't sound like he had to go back through and kind of reinvent the wheel, so to speak, on the planning standpoint. He was really to start to take the work that was already been done and build off of that versus having to recreate that existing work before he started doing the build.
Questions? Thoughts?
Yeah, they got their work cut out for them. Find to relocate that. It's gonna be a
Well-
big deal.
Yeah, to that point, Sam, as I was reading through this, I just wondered, would it make sense to engage in this study after we've initiated conversations with the DNR to see if they're even favorable, or what their, you know, openness is to the idea of moving it? I mean, because if they're not, I mean, would it make more sense to scale this study down to the things we actually can do that they might be willing to do, like the kayak and, you know, some of these other shoreline things? I just wonder if, you know, we're getting the cart before the horse. If the DNR is not going to play ball, why even waste time and money on it?
I think to that point, one of the reasons going to the DNR, if you can say, we've identified a couple of possible locations. Are we open to, you know, versus kind of going in there and asking that first question? It's probably, if we have nothing in sort of pre-planned or pre-developed, they probably are gonna say no, just because it's sort of like knowing that we have to do the study work, versus if we kind of come in and say, we've looked at the current lot situation, you know, kind of in this whole shoreline establishment, we can possibly move it over here, here's the impact for it. They may be more agreeable to moving it, you know, and again, when you look at all the projects in downtown, this really sort of is that linchpin project in terms of can we or can't we do it? And I would assume that if we're able to move it, it does open up a lot of Lakeside Memorial Park redevelopment, kind of allows us to kind of develop that northern spot. So my recommendation would go to those tables with the DNR, kind of saying, I understand this is I think no matter what, it's gonna be a fairly large lift to move an existing boat launch, but if we kind of go in there saying, we've identified area A as the preferred alternative, and here's some of the background information on how we got there, they may be more open to the possibility of moving it.
I think that what's come from this board, really from the beginning, even when, when we were part of this, is someone, whether it would have been Bruce or staff, to have that conversation with the DNR. Like, that just seemed like that should have been a part of the original agreement with him doing this downtown plan, and the fact that it hasn't happened is just a little, doesn't really make a lot of sense, to be quite honest with you. I'm just being honest.
The DNR's been contacted. It's the question of them returning that contact.
See, that just, that is,
Sounds about right.
well, it's, yeah. Any other thoughts?
Well, we've talked about this before, that that's always a possibility. It didn't look like a very good possibility to me, but if something's out there and there's a alternative that we can improve the downtown, I don't know what that would be, but it's gonna be a tough transition either way.
How does this study, the scope of the study and cost of the study change if we don't move the boat landing?
I could go back to Bruce and ask him to do an updated proposal, not saying, if we want to take the boat study, the boat portion out of it and just do the shoreline portion of it, I can have him readjust the.
Well, I mean, if I read this right, I mean, we're looking at several options related to the landing, including the idea of off-site parking, which I think, you know, is probably the most likely scenario. I mean, we all know, everybody in the room knows that to move that boat landing is a heavy financial lift. I just want to throw good money after bad. I don't know, I guess I'd just be curious if how it would change the scope if that wasn't the first piece of the conversation. Because if the DNR is not willing to play ball by even returning a phone call, I mean, that's a problem. they're, you know, we all got to be good partners. I guess it just gives me some concern.
And I don't know if an $18,000 study is gonna make that, if that's gonna change their mind to actually return phone calls based on that. I just, even if it's once a day, a phone call is made to DNR, like, these are, in the long-term partnership, because there's so many other issues on the lake that we have to play by their rules that continue to come up, whether it's additional dock, additional slips, not just downtown, but everywhere. It's just, I don't know how that, I mean, is that getting, you know, our elected officials at the state at the table as well that represent this area to have these conversations along with us? That there seems to be no excuse that they're not returning our calls. That's just unacceptable in my mind.
We will continue to contact the DNR and our local representative. I'm not sure what circumstances he has or not has regarding contact. I actually just sent him an email as we were talking, so. You know, I don't think we'll have to get the state involved, the reps, but we will continue to contact him and see what we can come up with. And if it's the committee's desire to postpone the vote on this until after we actually make contact, that's fine too.
And I can also ask Bruce in the breakout what the boat launch study is versus the rest of it. You know, I think when we first talked about this, it was like expand that scope, and it's pretty easy for him to go back through and say boat launch is X, shoreline is this, and we can just maybe readjust that scope and bring it back with a better idea from if the DNR is even open to it. It's an option.
Yeah, because at the same time, I'd like to hear the ideas that are out there. You know, where do you start, you know?
I mean, that's one of the issues we're talking about. It's not only the boat launch, but what we have, the shoreline restoration that we have to do, the transient docks, the expansion of my boat club docks, if that's necessary. We've kind of tied them all together, so we have one look at the lakefront, so we don't piecemeal out, we'll do the boat launch, but all of a sudden we start something else. We say, oh, we can't do that because we did this. It makes sense to have this all grouped together. It's really not that large of an area, so we should be able to consolidate that and take a look at everything. Because there's been a lot of requests for, the Lake District wants a dock or a fishing pier. My boat club wishes to expand. We have parking issues with the boat dock as it is now. Does it make sense? Is it only a parking issue? Where would that go? Or does it make sense to move the whole shebang and find somewhere else?
Yeah, and I don't think you're gonna get all the answers from the DNR. That's the problem, you know?
No, I think that DNR works better when you give them results of a plan and put something in front of them. That's just, you say, here's what we're thinking, here's what we've studied. Do you see problems with what we've done? Do you see problems with, putting a new transient boat dock, 300 feet out in the lake because that's where shallow water ends or whatever the case may be? And what do we have to do to expand my boat dock? Tell me about the environmental study that has to be done, which it does. What kind of lakefront, do we need riprap? What kind of restoration will happen at the shoreline to make it acceptable to DNR? That's when they'll really start to get involved, when we decide what we're gonna do with that whole frontage and what we can do to stabilize that. That will be more of their issue than whether we can put a pier out or something like that.
I did see on the council agenda that my boat club is on that. Is that just for just a normal extension of the current agreement, or?
Yes, we need a little more time it made no sense to extend it long-term until we figure out where we're going with all this.
Just a quick question. It says they'll be doing concept diagrams for up to 5 opportunity sites. So are they going to be talking to private homeowners about land, or?
I think if we identify what those 5 sites are, I think that's part of the concept. We obviously want to make sure it's if it's an opportunity there, that we make sure that if it does come to fruition, that we'd have a party that'd be willing to sell, at that point. But in terms of where those sites are located at this point, I have a couple in my head that maybe possibly, but there's a bunch that would still be yet to be determined.
So that's part of Bruce's study to determine that? He says up to 5 opportunity sites. So, or is he just going to go around the lake and figure out 5 sites?
So we've seen, in the past, we did a study, it must have been 20-some years ago now, about the possible relocation. They went through and they identified possible places that a boat launch could be located at. And these, again, the study at this point needs to be updated because this was 20 years ago. A lot of developments happened on the lake since that point. And I would anticipate this looking the same, where they kind of look around and say, okay, where can you, from a traffic standpoint and a parking standpoint and a lot standpoint, where is there enough land to possibly even put an access? Because obviously some of these sites are going to be grade challenged. You're not going to be able to make the, turn in there. They're going to be too narrow, et cetera. So he'll look for 5 sites that possibly meet the criteria, and then also put together cost estimates for what those sites would be as part of this proposal.
Any other thoughts or questions?
I guess the real issue about this whole thing, I'd sure like to have the answers to all these questions. That's basically what wants to. And I don't see where staff can get those answers for us. I really don't. It's $18,000 of money to be spent, but if we're gonna look at this thing seriously, and if somebody can come up with 5 opportunity sites, then I don't know what we can complain about.
And I think also to build off of that too, is not forget too, like with the shoreline work that's included in this as well. Getting materials that if a DNR opens up a grant funding for a shoreline restoration or a dock program, for example, to have those, turnkey ready to be submitted, there's a huge advantage to that in terms of taking these dollars and rolling those into grant dollars as well. Because if right now those projects came forward, we'd still have to go through some of this level of detail that's there. Now, granted, this isn't construction level documents. We couldn't authorize a project and actually start to build on it, but we could at least get it through a DNR funding to have a pretty good idea of, for us to do all the shoreline restoration down in Lakeside Memorial Park, it's gonna cost us X. How much of that's gonna come from the grant? How much is that gonna come from local general funds? We have a pretty good idea what these are gonna cost, which I think there's a benefit to using and applying for grants as well, but having a good idea, so we have a basis in reality of what we need to apply from a grant standpoint.
So, on a bigger picture, that as far as the downtown plan, I don't, maybe a workshop opportunity or something with council and EDA and whoever to go through and determine, like, prioritize what those different areas are and what we want to focus on. In some, talking about kind of those low-hanging fruits that are less expensive. This one seems like the most expensive piece, and I get it's the biggest piece that can dictate a lot of different things. But I guess if there was a study coming through that someone was willing to, work with MnDOT and all that to how we could change some streetscape or something that's more obtainable short-term, I think I would be more apt for it. I honestly would have a hard time approving this without at least a conversation with DNR or a meeting, like, hey, if we come back with this study and we have some ideas, because he laid it out in that downtown plan where we kind of thought maybe this stuff would go. We already have that. I'd be more apt to approve something like this after that conversation and maybe show them just the downtown plan as what we want to do, where they had the kayak things. Like, we have some of this stuff high level, but we have that already, and we've already paid for that. And I would be more apt to approve something like this if we at least had that conversation and show them the downtown plan and what we are considering doing.
We can do that, and I think just bear in mind too that if it come down to grant applications, so for 23 grant applications, we are at some point gonna need this level of work completed on these projects. We just don't have that level of detail right now for us to put together. I would say a grant application for shoreline restoration that is based in reality what the costs are gonna be. We can make estimates on it, but then the problem can become, you get a grant, and all of a sudden your real costs become exponentially higher than what you originally anticipated, and then the grant's not meeting the funding requirements, so you're spending more money at the general fund than if you have a better idea of what those dollars are. So I think we can pause, but just be aware that at some point we may have to do another level of study of this level of detail to get, if we're gonna pursue grant or other funding opportunities for shoreline restoration work or kayak expansions or dock expansions in the downtown. We are gonna need something, maybe not to this level, but we are gonna need additional study work completed prior to authorizing those projects.
And to your point, with the downtown study, I do think after January, we'll have to have a workshop on the downtown plan, not only priorities and which projects go first, but how we're going to fund them. Obviously, that's the elephant in the room, is how we do that. And on the staff level, we think this is pretty low-hanging fruit kind of stuff, where streetscape, concrete, all that starts to add up. But we will have, come after January, February, March, probably, a meeting and start to talk about the downtown plan, because now it's done. You'll need to tell us what the next step is and what you want to look at.
And just one last thing, we have received a verbal inquiry from your boat club. They will be pursuing a conversation with the city in 2023 about expanding their docking situation, which is a pretty significant improvement along that shoreline. Without maybe having some of this in place, it doesn't maybe poise us the best to think about the long-term development of that shoreline area in the park, so.
So you're looking for a motion or decision on this tonight?
Correct. I mean, either direction to go ahead and authorize it, or have me go back and, get an updated or revised proposal from Bruce.
You want to make a motion on either way?
Well, it sounds like there's some opposition to this particular proposal, so I mean, it doesn't really make sense to make a motion in favor of it. So I guess what I'd like to do is make a motion that we extend the conversation somehow.
I would recommend tabling it then until the next meeting, and I'll come
Yeah.
back with the updated.
That's my motion.
And so to Leigh's point, like maybe going back to Bruce and taking, like breaking it out apart, the restoration part as opposed to the boat launch, maybe seeing that in two separate ways?
Well, yeah, I guess, I mean, just to clarify, I'd be just curious what that price difference is. I mean, I'm in 100% agreement that work needs to get done so we can be ready for grants and like everything that was talked about. I just wonder how much of this cost is specifically related to moving that boat launch. And without having a sense of warmth to that idea from the DNR, I guess I just, you know, there's a lot we can do down there. Not everything we want to, but there's a lot we can do down there without moving that boat launch. Personally, I'd like to find another place for it. I know I'm not in the majority maybe on that. But if I heard Bruce correctly, I mean, he felt like it was a, you know, kind of a linchpin to stifling growth downtown. And so I just, you know, I think there's a, you know, I don't know if conflict's the right word, but there's a challenge there, right? And so I would just like to know, I'd like to know that the DNR is supportive of that move before we invest more money in the idea of moving it, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure they'll commit
I-
to whether they're supportive or not, but,
Or at least
yeah,
open the
I think that,
conversation.
I understand the boat dock issue, whether to move it or not, but also if we don't move it, then we have to look at the parking, because that's been a constant complaint, and that should be another part of this if the decision is not to move it. How do we handle all these parking? Where does it go? Does it go off-site? Do we have to buy land off-site? Is it, you know, there's probably two options there. Move the boat dock with the parking here where it all can be, or keep the boat dock and find a place to park them that makes sense and convenient for the boaters, but also not interfering with some of the businesses that, which has been the complaint.
Okay, so if I'm hearing this, we'll, I guess, table it and go back to Bruce and we can maybe break it out. I think there's some good pieces of this that would be, you know, great for grant-type things, but I think, you know, I think it's consensus that we just hold on that. And as long as we're talking about Bruce, and I think we've talked about this before, but his work on that small area from downtown with changing firms, and where are we at with that, or we've seen anything back on that to date?
We have, I mean, and I think that's enlightened the conversations for downtown redevelopment. You know, I mean, we've had quite a few meetings, and that work has definitely been involved in all the conversations we've had with the potential developer for the redevelopment downtown. So there's been value there, and you'll see that as that project comes forward, you'll see that some of that work come forward as well at that
So
time.
it's considered a final, can we have a final report on it?
It's some rendering, it's not a report, but it's kind of options about how that, I think it's First Street or Avenue, whichever it is, should look, and what may options depending on the development, with the guidelines of trying not to lose much parking or to maximize parking as much as we can there. And that you'll start to see when the concept plans come in for the development, which the Plan Commission's already seen those, right?
That is correct, yep.
Yeah,
The planning
so-
commission has reviewed the plans, or concept.
And so the EDA and the council are next to see those concepts.
Good.
You'll
What is
need a
the motion?
motion and a vote on the
Yeah.
table.
Yeah, I'll second Sam's motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so 2023 meeting schedule discussion.
Forgot about that one. One of the things we talked about, looking at 2023's meeting schedule, is that when I looked at other EDAs within the county, most are meeting on a monthly basis instead of twice a month. And one of the suggestions was to change the EDA meeting frequency just to once a month. That does align us with how almost every other EDA in the county is running. With that change, if there ever is a need for a second meeting in the month, say we have some business that's pressing, we can always add a meeting. But instead of kind of the current state where we've held that second meeting for downtown planning, now that that's done, we can really sort of focus on once a month meetings. Just wanted to get some feedback on that possible schedule change for 23, is going just to a single meeting a month versus 2 a month.
Works for me.
Definitely.
Yeah, So I would think that that would be fine, as long as there is that option if something comes up that we can,
Right,
or workshop, you know, because before the downtown, I think we had one was a typical meeting, the other one was a workshop type environment, so then that went to the downtown plan. So as long as, maybe I think that's important to have a workshop part of that as well.
There very well be, as you look forward to 23 with some policy development, the need for a second workshop in a month. But I think kind of keeping them on the calendar as 2 a month is just so you end up having to cancel them. So I think doing one with the ad is recommended.
Is that a formal, or just?
That's all I need is that point, is just the
Yeah.
liaison agreement on it. We'll
Okay.
pursue one meeting a month.
Okay. Great. All right, city updates. Anyone have any?
Oh,
Debbie?
I didn't know. Some commissions go around the room, I never know. Just a couple, I did participate along with Dan last week. We did go to the career and tech education, the educator business mixer at the high school. It was an interesting just group of business professionals, educators, sitting down and learning about, it was millennials?
Gen Z.
Gen Z,
Gen
thank
Z.
you. And how they're affecting the workplace and our working community, so it was pretty interesting. I also, end of last month, attended the Economic Development of Associations Minnesota to offer a 5-day economic development basic course. I did take that. It's been a really great experience to just get to know some new professionals in economic development, but also really hone in on some of the skills that I had, but definitely will apply in this with working with this body. And then just a couple of development updates. I have been meeting fairly regularly with folks interested in redevelopment of the Vanelli's block. We just met today. They're going to go back to the Planning Commission with their preliminary concept plan before coming to the EDA and the council. Probably won't go to the EDA and the council until January, just because of some of the changeover that's going to occur with both of those bodies. I think the decision really is make sure that we get feedback from the, appointed and elected officials that will be in the position over the next year, 18 months, as we go through formalized review processes. Also have been discussing the sale of the airport business park parcel. So those are 2 parcels that the city owns right along Fenway Boulevard. Meeting with all sorts of just different people that are interested in moving to Stillwater, moving their businesses to Stillwater. Oh my gosh. I didn't even say city of, and every time I say city of, it comes out. I'm so sorry. And then anyways.
That's okay.
Forest Lake, I'm not talking about moving businesses to Stillwater. And then lastly, made some progress with the Planning Commission on the MXR1 district. So I think I've updated this body on just the idea of amending that district, and as the comp plan really calls for, creating smaller lot sizes to be more consistent with the low to medium density range that we're looking at. Depending on our meeting schedule in December, the Planning Commission may hold a hearing. That's really just contingent on how many private applications we're getting. Planning department's pretty full right now with a lot of site plan reviews, new Forest Lake Ford dealership coming into town, looking at just a lot of site plan amendments of existing businesses that are looking at expanding, growing, so it's kind of an exciting time, but we are pretty busy, even though it's what we kind of try, our non-traditional development time, so. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Unless you have any questions for me.
Yeah, does anyone have questions for? Dan, do you have anything else?
I have nothing else.
I
Patrick?
have nothing.
Ryan?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just recap on the Highway 97 open house that we had with MnDOT on November 1st, first Tuesday in November. Very well-attended event, talking about the improvements planned for 2025 between I-35 and first roundabout here at Trunk Highway 61. So a lot of positive feedback, a lot of a few things here and there that we'll continue to work with and look at with MnDOT. We are engaging with MnDOT already again tomorrow. So that's, favorable improvement moving forward that has a lot of safety improvements and pedestrian facilities that would be coming along with that. And the city staff still continue to work with Washington County on their 2 co-op agreement projects, Everton Avenue from Broadway Avenue up by Menards and then down to the old 11th Avenue That's planned for 2024 construction project, so the county's continuing to work on plans and specs for that. We've been working very closely with them on lighting needs, and we have kind of outlined the concept and some potential costs and schedules with the council. But really where we're working right now on that is in depth with Great River Energy and offsets and pole distances and stuff like that. And so it's getting pretty complicated, and we want to come back, but we are looking at some of that stuff along there. And then again, safety improvements and pet improvements too. And Washington County's just started the project developments. We got several concepts that we're continuing to work through and trying to balance the pedestrian facilities, safety improvements, intersection access along County State Aid Highway 32 or 11th Avenue, which goes from Winning Supply at Highway 61 all the way to the bridge area. So it's a lot of that stuff that's going on. That's, upon that completion, there's gonna be a lot of nice networks, connections, safety improvements, and rideable pavement. So it's a lot of busy things going on, and then a lot of stuff Abby mentioned too.
It was a great turnout at the MnDOT open house. I should have asked Karen, do you have anything to add?
I don't have any comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Washington County updates. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any formal updates, but I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Questions for Chris? All right. Okay, Chamber, I don't know if either you or...
Nanette didn't email me today, but I can say that I'm sure she's busy working on the gala for tomorrow night. We're having our annual awards banquet. Historically, it's been done as a luncheon, and they decided to do it as a gala this time over at Stella's. And it was a sellout to the point where they had to actually figure out a way to squeeze more people in there. So we'll be sitting on each other's lap, but has a fantastic turnout for tomorrow night. So looking forward to that. And then just knowing that there's also been several new members that have joined. She set out a major goal for the Chamber Board to grow by 100 members this coming year. And we got work to do, but we're well on our way. And I know that there was 2 new members here in the last handful of weeks, or a week or so. So lots of good stuff happening there.
Great. Okay, this has been a long one, but we got a lot of things done, so that's great. Anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.